All right, so we've got this full length Jim Simons interview, and I can't wait. I'm going to take notes this entire time because I think this is how you get better. You find somebody ahead of you, he has $31 billion. I don't have a B yet, sad face. So I can learn from him. Jim Simons is the best algorithmic trader of all time. I am a fully automated trader. I used to teach how to do this as well, but I closed that down because I came to the sad conclusion that everybody is using 40x leverage still, and everybody is still trading by hand. Yes, it's a big endeavor to learn how to code and automate your trading. I'm not here to convince anybody on that anymore. I'm just using my quant app to enter upon liquidations. I'm taking over people's liquidations opposed to just saying buy or sell. So I'm just using quantitative techniques, tactics, whatever, to build into a plug and play downloadable app. And that just gives me a lot more free time. So I'm going to study to come up with other strategies that I'll still build into my systems. I've been here for 5 years, so I have some pretty good systems that are locked in, allowing me to have some free time to build things like this that will help the majority, as there's 100,000 of you here now, and 99% of you are still using 40x leverage, something I swore off of, hand trading, something I swore off of. But if I'm going to do it and really help the majority, I'm going to do it quantitatively in an app that you can just download for free. And then I'll just spend my time researching, because I think the process of automating your trading is research, backtest, and then implement. So don't need to talk about that, as I am not teaching that anymore. I'm just competing with everybody in the market the way they are doing it with 40x leverage. So let's study while we wait for a couple of these liquidations to trigger. You can see I have when this guy gets liquidated here, I have an entry. And then when this guy gets liquidated here, I have an entry as well. So long or short, I think the market is going to be bouncy for a while. Obviously, I like long better, but it's not about what I like. Let's listen to Jim. He's got a lot to teach us.
Should we start at the beginning?
Okay.
As a child, were you good at mathematics? Like, was mathematics a natural thing for you?
Yeah, it was very natural. And I always liked it. I like counting. I like continually multiplying things by 2, although by the time I got to 1024 or whatever it is, I had enough of it. But I like math. I discovered as a very young kid, maybe 4, something called Zeno's paradox. Did you ever hear of Zeno's paradox? My father told me that the car could run out of gas. And I was disturbed by that notion. It never occurred to me. But then I thought, well, it shouldn't run out. It could always use half of what it has, and then it could use half of that, and then half of that, and it could go on forever, and so it would never run out. So now, it didn't occur to me, yes, but it wouldn't get very far either. But the idea that, in principle, you didn't have to run out of gas was kind of a profound thought for a very little boy.
Were you a talented student? Were you always getting really good grades?
Well, I was a pretty talented student. I knew I was very smart somehow. On the other hand, I was very careless. So I sometimes screw up arithmetic tests just because I did it too fast or sloppily. But I liked everything about it. I liked everything about math. I loved learning the formulas for the volume of a sphere, 4/3 pi r cubed. I always thought that was a great formula. When I got to high school, we started with plane geometry, proofs and theorems. That's where I really got gripped. I really loved that. I loved working on. Some of the problems were harder than others, and I liked doing that. I was never the fastest guy in the world, but I would plod through it and with determination. I just liked it.
Did it feel like this was where your career was going to take you, or were you like another boy who dreamed of being a baseballer or something?
Oh, no. The only thing I thought about was I would be a mathematician, whatever exactly that meant. I didn't know quite what it meant, except that mathematics was the only subject I really liked. Science was okay, but it wasn't very well taught where I went to high school, at least I don't think so. And history, English, I loved to read, but I wasn't a good writer. I read a lot. When I went to MIT, I majored in mathematics, of course, and skipped the first year because I'd had some of those courses in high school. And I even took a graduate course in my freshman year of a second semester in math, because it said no prerequisites required. I said, oh, no prerequisites, I'll take that course. I had a very hard time getting my arms around that course. I finished it okay, but I was very puzzled by some of the concepts. However, that summer, I got another book. I got a book on, this was algebra, but not algebra like solving equations. It was abstract algebra. And then in a week, everything came together for me. I understood. I was no longer puzzled. I understood why they did everything. Other parts of math got me stymied for a while. But typically, it would take some time for me to sort of grasp what they were trying to do, and then it would go very smoothly. So I graduated early from MIT in 3 years.
Did you imagine you would be a professor sitting in a university,
No.
or like what? You had no grasp of what?
I didn't. Yeah, by the time that my freshman year was over, I kind of realized that's what it would mean, that someone would pay you for thinking about mathematics and creating mathematics. What I thought earlier was I would do something that involved mathematics, but it was mathematics that I wanted to major in, and I could see quickly that, well, that's the way. If you're going to do that, you're going to be a professor somewhere and profess.
You also talked about this week of algebra where everything sort of fell into place.
Yeah.
Is that a common thing? Is this a thing that always happens? There's this moment where all the cogs move into place, and it's like, oh, I get it now.
I think, yeah, there are moments like that. sometimes you're introduced to a new concept, and you wonder, well, why are they talking about this? Why is this concept interesting? And then you think and you see some examples, and you say, oh yeah, okay, this is really good. A lot in mathematics is making definitions. You'll see things that really could come together under one aegis, and you can define this set of notions, and sometimes just a structure which follows all these notions. And that's a great way that mathematics has advanced, because when you put a lot of things together that have similar characteristics, then you can try to prove theorems about the general set of things rather than some particular example. And that turns out to be a very powerful approach. So making a good definition is a good thing. They wanted me to go to Berkeley and get away from MIT, meet some new faculty, because I was quite close to the MIT faculty, and they thought, I think they didn't want to get rid of me so much as they thought I was probably pretty good, so I should get exposed to a certain guy named Chern, who was just coming to Berkeley that year. And I got this very nice fellowship, and I went there. I was very eager to work with Chern, meet Chern, except he wasn't there. He celebrated his first year at Berkeley. He had just come to Berkeley, and he celebrated that first year by taking a sabbatical. So he wasn't there. So I worked with another guy, which was fine. And by the time Chern came, in the second year, I was already pretty far along with the thesis project. I was giving a seminar at the beginning of my second year at Berkeley, and in walked this tall Chinese guy. And I said to the guy next to me, who's that? I said, that's Chern. That's Chern. I didn't know he was Chinese. I thought Chern was probably short for Chernowski or something, or he was probably some Polish guy who had shortened his name to Chern. If it had been Chen or Chan, I would have known it was Chinese, but Chern with the R, I didn't know. But anyway, so I met Chern then, and we became friends. Of course, I was much younger than he, but we became friends and later collaborators.
Can you give some idea about what your area of specialization is at this point? What are you zeroing in mathematically on?
Well, at that point, and pretty much thereafter, the field that I worked in was called differential geometry. Differential geometry is geometry, but it's the geometry of curved spaces. It's not flat things in the plane. It's any shape or form, but typically with some distance function so that you knew how far apart things were. And the basic object to study is what's called a manifold. And a manifold is a lot of pieces of space glued together. So, for example, the surface of a sphere is a manifold. Now, you can't just take one little sheet of paper and make a sphere out of that, but you could glue a bunch of pieces of paper together and make a sphere. So a manifold is something that locally in your neighborhood looks like it's just regular space. Maybe it's curved a little bit, but globally it could be quite different. So, and the surface of a tire, of a donut, for example, is fundamentally different from the surface of a sphere. You can't deform one into the other. What really got me onto it is a certain theorem, which is called Stokes' theorem. Now, Stokes' theorem is the ultimate, I think, generalization of what was originally called the fundamental theorem of calculus. Now, I don't know if you studied calculus, but the basic theorem is if you integrate the derivative of a function, so you take a function, you take its derivative, first derivative, and then you integrate that, let's say, from A to B. Well, that gets you back the original function. The answer, when you integrate the derivative, is of f. It's f of b minus f of a. That's the answer. If you integrate the derivative of a function, you get back the value of the function. Well, that was the fundamental theorem of calculus. Presumably Newton knew that. Now, that had been generalized into higher dimensions. So there were other things you could integrate and differentiate and go from boundaries to interiors and so on. And the general statement of that theorem was, to me, almost breathtaking. It was so beautiful, that theorem. And that's one of the basic theorems in differential geometry. And it's about integrating something over the boundary, and that's the same as integrating something else over the interior, something related to it. It's derivative, in effect. It's called its differential. So there's a whole calculus of things called differential forms and integration and all that. And that it takes place in manifolds in general, and anything that looks like pieces of space. So I love that theorem, and that's what got me into differential geometry.
So was it a beauty or an elegance you saw, or was it a trophy and a prize you saw that could be chased?
No, it was just the beauty. It was just the beauty of it. I just liked it. I learned a fair amount of algebra, and that was fine, but it didn't grab me. But the geometry did. So that's what I specialized in. And when I got to Berkeley, I was fooling around and started. I'd made some observations, and I mentioned them to my thesis advisor, the guy I was going to work with. And he said, "Oh, that's interesting. That makes me think about such and such a problem." There was a problem floating around that people had been trying and failing to solve. But I thought, oh, that's very interesting. So I started working on that. And he advised me not to, because so-and-so had tried it and someone else had tried it, and these girls were big shots, and I was just a little shot. But I didn't pay much attention to him. And I solved it, and just worked through it, and you know, had a little help along the way with people, but basically I drove that. I had done some other mathematics after my thesis, work on something called minimal varieties, and it was kind of a fundamental paper. It took me 6 years to write that paper. People were, I think, thought, how could I take 6 years? But anyway, it did, and that turned out to be a very good paper. That was where I was coming from. At roughly that time frame, or a year or two afterwards, I went, when I was 30, to Stony Brook to be chair of their math department. Stony Brook University was a very new university. They had a rather poor math department. In fact, it was very bad, but an excellent physics department. They offered me this job as being chairman, and I thought that would be a lot of fun. In that time frame, I had decided to try to learn something about an area of topology which is related to geometry. It's kind of handmaidens of each other, called characteristic classes, whatever that might be. And I thought, I'm going to just learn these characteristic classes because I didn't really know it, and it was important, and I wanted to learn about it. So I kind of started from the beginning and worked my way up. And I was trying to solve a problem, as I later discovered, had intrigued many people, and it's never been solved satisfactorily. So since I say that, I didn't solve it either. But in the course of trying to do that, certain terms came up, certain functions of a sort that began to look just very interesting to me. And I saw, so they were a pesky term that I couldn't get rid of. I needed to get rid of that term in order to make this formula that I wanted. But the term seemed to have a life of its own. And one thing led to another. I defined a certain invariant of a three-dimensional manifold and used that to prove something, what's called immersion theorems, whatever those are. This was a very handy thing. And I showed it to Chern. I said, look at these results in 3 dimensions. And he looked at it and said, we could do this in all the dimensions, because it was an area that he really knew about. Not the results that I'd gotten, but the general area. So we worked together, and we came up with these results, this whole structure. In fact, that's the slides of the presentation that Chern made at the International Congress in the early 70s. It was very nice geometry. I pushed on with it, and we defined some things called differential characters, which was another chapter, working with a guy named Cheeger. But the Chern-Simons invariance, about 10 years later, the physicists got a hold of it, and it seemed to be very good for what ailed them, whatever might have ailed them. And it wasn't just string theory, as I subsequently developed. It was kind of all areas of physics, including condensed matter theory. Even some astronomers seem to want to look at those terms. That's really what's great about basic science, in this case mathematics. I mean, I didn't know any physics. It didn't occur to me that this material that Chern and I had developed would find use somewhere else altogether. This happens in basic science all the time, that one guy's discovery leads to someone else's invention and leads to another guy's machine, or whatever it is. So basic science is at the, it's the seed corn of our knowledge of the world.
What did it feel like at the time you were coming up with it? Did it feel obscure and just like a little diversion, and then 10 years later it felt special?
Well, it never felt like a little diversion. I really liked the results. I loved the subject, but I liked it for itself. I wasn't thinking of applications. I mentioned to C.N. Yang, who was at Stony Brook at the time, who was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist of great renown. I said, I've got these things. Maybe they'd be useful in physics, because I knew the physicists were looking in the same places, using certain mathematical structures, but he didn't bite, and I didn't know how it would be useful, so I just left it alone. But I was very pleased with the math, and then it led to another set of definitions and some math that I did with this guy, Jeff Cheeger, which started as sort of a mini field, although I didn't realize it at the time. It's now called differential cohomology. And so there's a fair amount of people working in that area.
What does that make you feel? Does it become like vindication, or what I did was more useful than I thought? Or like, what do you think when it gets used 10 years later? Or by then are you divorced from it and you're like, do what you want with it? I've moved on.
Oh, it's always made me feel very good, of course. Naturally, you like to think that something you did had far-reaching ramifications. It was nice, but it wasn't. I didn't go to bed dreaming about, now I've revolutionized physics. Which, first of all, I didn't revolutionize physics, but did some stuff there. And but sure, it made me feel good. Actually, in the middle of my mathematics career, which ended when I was about 37 or 38, was that I spent 4 years at a place called the Institute for Defense Analyses down in Princeton, which was a super secret government-based, national security agency-based place for code cracking, trying to break the enemies, whoever it was, Russia, I guess, code machines and cipher machines. I spent 4 years there in Princeton. During that time, I was working on this. Remember I said it took me 6 years to work through all this stuff in minimal varieties. I did a lot of it while I was there, but I also learned about computers and algorithms in the code cracking field. I was no good as a programmer, terrible, but I was pretty good at coming up with algorithms and trying to, and I found that very exciting to think, this might help crack this code. Here's an algorithm which could work. Someone else would program it up. Then it would run on the computer, and maybe it would work and maybe it wouldn't. And I did one thing there that was quite good, because I can't tell you what it was. It's all classified. So I had a good career there, both doing mathematics and learning about the fun of computer modeling, let's say.
Was that specialization that you'd had during your PhD, the manifolds and the topology, was that related to the algorithms? Were the two?
No, completely separate.
Why were you drafted in for that in the first place then?
They paid money. I was getting kind of bored simply being an academic. And also, this work, this 6-year project was maybe making me feel, gosh, other guys are publishing papers and I'm not. But I wasn't thrilled with being an academic. And this place hired mathematicians, a handful. You could do mathematics half your time, and the other half of your time you were supposed to work on their stuff. There was no teaching, so it was like, I could do as much mathematics as I was doing anyway, and they paid better. And I thought this would be interesting and a nice change, and it was. And I enjoyed it. I did a lot of good math, or that I thought was good, and it did good work for them. But that ended after 4 years because I got fired. And
Well, you can't just leave it at that. You got fired.
I got fired.
Why did you get fired?
Well, I got fired because this was in the middle of the Vietnam War, which I didn't like, the war. Not that we were doing anything to support the war in this particular organization, but nonetheless I just didn't like it. And the head of the organization, he was down in Washington, he was a big shot named Maxwell Taylor, General Maxwell Taylor. He wrote an article in the New York Times magazine section, the Sunday magazine, the cover story, how we're really winning the war in Vietnam, we just have to stay the course and it's all going to be great. And I thought, that's a lot of baloney. So I wrote a letter to the Times saying not everyone who works for General Taylor supports his views, and in my opinion, blah, blah, blah. It was a good letter. And they published it right away, of course, because it was unusual that someone would write such a letter in his situation. I didn't hear a peep. No one said anything at the company. They didn't say, you shouldn't have done that. But I was clearly on the watch list.
Did you, when you wrote it, did you know you were doing something reckless?
No, I didn't really think it was reckless because it was my opinion, and it really didn't have anything to do with my work. But then, about 3 or 4 months later, a guy from Newsweek magazine came to see me, and he said he's doing an article about people who work for the Defense Department who are opposed to the war. And he says, I have a lot of trouble finding such people, but could I interview you? Well, I was 29 years old. No one had ever asked to interview me before. It sounded like, hey, maybe I'll be interviewed. Okay, you can interview me. So we asked this and that, but he really wanted to know, so what is your policy? So I sort of made up a policy, although it was pretty much true. I said, well, you know, here at IDA, you have to spend at least 50% of your time on their stuff. In those days, it was secret that it was even codes and ciphers, so I just said their stuff. But you could spend 50% of your time in mathematics. And so my algorithm now is, until the Vietnam War is over, I will spend all my time on mathematics. And then, after it's over, I'll spend all my time on their stuff until the two things match up again. And then, and that was kind of largely true. I was doing mostly mathematics, but I was doing a little of their stuff. So then, it occurred to me to tell my local boss that I gave this interview. He said, well, what'd you tell him? I said, well, I told him what I just said to you. He said, you did? He says, oh, I better call Taylor, his boss. And he called Taylor, and I came back into his office, and he said, you're fired. I said, I'm fired? He said, you're fired. Taylor fired you. Taylor told me to fire you. So, well, I was fired. I said, you know, I don't know how you can fire me. My title is permanent member, which was. I started as a temporary member, and then I became a permanent member. And the boss was very funny. He said, well, here's the difference between a temporary member and a permanent member. A temporary member has a contract. A permanent member doesn't. I had no contract. So I was out of there. And it was amusing. I mean, I had solved this big math problem that I told you about, this 6-year thing. I knew I was going to get a job very easily. So I wasn't really worried about that.
You've honed your skills with algorithms, and you've learned a lot about computers. So I'm seeing the writing on the wall here for where things go next. How do we progress to you?
Yeah, so at a certain point, then I went to Stony Brook. After this, it was chair, and did this work with Churn, and did some work with Cheeger. And we got stuck. We were trying to prove something, mathematical thing, and it was very, very frustrating. Worked on it for about 2 years. We got nowhere. I mean, it's okay to work for a long time if you feel you're getting somewhere, but we got absolutely nowhere on this problem. And my father had made a little bit of money, and I had the opportunity to try investing it, and that was interesting. And I thought, you know, I'm going to try another career altogether. And so I went into the money management business, so to speak.
So you started with some of your dad's money, and that got you a taste of an interest in it?
Yeah, some family money. And then some other people put up some money. And I did that. No models for the first 2 years.
So what were you doing then? You were just using cunning and, you know, just like normal people do?
Like normal people do. And I brought in a couple of people to work with me, and we were extremely successful. I think it was just plain good luck, but nonetheless, we were very successful. But I could see, but this was a very gut-wrenching business. You know, you come in one morning, you think you're a genius, the markets are for you. We were trading currencies and commodities and financial instruments and so on, not stocks, but those kinds of things. And the next morning you come and you feel like a jerk, the market's against you. It was very gut-wrenching. And in looking at the patterns of prices, I could see that there was something we could study here, that there were maybe some ways to predict prices mathematically or statistically. And I started working on that, and then brought in some other people, and gradually we built models, and the models got better and better, and finally the models replaced the fundamental stuff. So it took a while.
I would have thought, with your background as a mathematician, this would have almost occurred to you immediately, like you would have straight away seen this. What was the 2-year delay?
Well, two things. I saw it pretty early, and I brought in a guy who was a wonderful guy, also from the code cracking place. And he was, I thought, together we'll start building models. That was fairly early, but it wasn't right away. But he got more interested in the fundamental stuff, and he says the model's not going to be very strong, and so on and so forth. So we didn't get very far. But I knew there were models to be made. Then I brought in another mathematician, and a couple more, and a better computer guy. And then we started making models which really worked. But, you know, the general, there's something called the efficient market theory, which says that there's nothing in the data, let's say price data, which will indicate anything about the future, because the price is sort of always right. The price is always right in some sense. But that's just not true. So there are anomalies in the data, even in the price history data. For one thing, commodities especially used to trend. Not dramatically trend, but trend. So if you could get the trend right, you'd bet on the trend, and you'd make money more often than you wouldn't, whether it was going down or going up. That was an anomaly in the data, but gradually we found more and more anomalies. None of them is so overwhelming that you're going to clean up on a particular anomaly, because if they were, other people would have seen them. So they have to be subtle things. And you put together a collection of these subtle anomalies, and you begin to get something that will predict pretty well.
How elaborate are these things? Because in my head, I'm imagining, some equation like Pythagoras equation. You put a few numbers in, and something spits out. But are these giant beasts of equations and algorithms, or are they simple things?
Well, the system, as it is today, is extraordinarily elaborate. But it's not a whole lot of. It's what's called machine learning. So you find things that are predictive. You might guess, oh, such and such should be predictive, might be predictive, and you test it out in the computer, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You test it out on long-term historical data and price data and other things. And then you add to the system this if it works, and if it doesn't, you throw it out. So there aren't elaborate equations, at least not for the prediction part. But the prediction part is not the only part. You have to know what your costs are when you trade. You're going to move the market when you trade. Now, the average person will buy 200 shares of something, and he's not going to move the market at all because it's too small. But if you want to buy 200,000 shares, you're going to push the price. How much are you going to push the price? How are you going to, are you going to push it so far that you can't make any money because you've distorted things so much? So you have to understand costs, and that's something that's important. And then you have to understand how to minimize the volatility of the whole assembly of positions that you have, and be. So you have to do that. That last part takes some fairly sophisticated applied mathematics, not earth-shattering, but fairly sophisticated.
What discipline of mathematics or disciplines? Is it multidisciplinary, or are we talking?
It's mostly statistics. It's mostly statistics and some probability theory. But I can't get into what things we do use and what things we don't use. We reach for different things that might be effective. So we're very universal. We don't have any. But it's a big computer model. For one thing, there is a capacity to the major model. It can manage a certain amount of money, which is rather large, but it can't manage an enormous amount of money, because you're going to end up pushing the market around too much. So it's kind of a sweet spot as to how much it's reasonable to manage. Therefore, it would never grow into some behemoth which would take everybody out, and you'd be the only player. Well, of course, you're the only player, there'd be no one to play against. There are limitations, at least the way we see it. But we keep improving it. We have about 100 PhDs working for the firm.
That's what I mean. How did you get to that point? Did you start to think, we need this, we need that?
We just hired smart people. My algorithm has always been, you get smart people together, you give them a lot of freedom, create an atmosphere where everyone talks to everyone else. They're not hiding in a corner with their own little thing. They talk to everybody else. And you provide the best infrastructure, the best computers and so on that people can work with, and make everyone partners. So that was the model that we used in Renaissance. So we would bring in smart folks, and they didn't know anything about finance, but they learned.
What was your employment criteria then? If they knew nothing about finance, what were you looking for in them?
Someone with a PhD in physics, and who'd had 5 years out and had written a few good papers and was obviously a smart guy, or in astronomy, or in mathematics, or in statistics. Someone who had done science and done it well, and was interested in, applying his mind, or her mind, although it was mostly his, to modeling markets and making money. Well, it's a very good spirit. Now, I've been 6 years away from the company, so I'm not running it anymore. But I'm the chair of the board, and I go to a monthly board meeting. I think that the morale is very good, the spirit is good, and it's really a very good way applying to work scientifically. It's a big collaborative effort, and everyone is happy to see someone else come up with something good, because he, the first person, is going to share in that, because everyone shared in the profits. So okay, you might wish it was you to show how smart you were, but nonetheless, good, he did it, I'm going to make money from it.
I would imagine lots of people want to be financially successful. Most people want that, of course.
I suppose.
And lots of people are good at mathematics and know a lot about computers, like, at your level, I would imagine. Why did you do it? Why didn't someone else do it?
I don't know. Well, first of all, some other people have done it. I think that our firm is better, but nonetheless, I'm pretty sure of that. But nonetheless, other people have done some very good modeling, and so we're not alone. But it's not easy to do, and there's a big barrier to entry. For example, huge data sets that we've collected over the years, programs that we've written to make it really easy to test hypotheses and so on. The infrastructure is exceptionally good, so everything is tuned right. It took years to learn how to do that. People don't leave our firm, or if they do, they leave to just do something else altogether. Everyone has signed a forever non-disclosure agreement and so on, because we're very secretive about what we do. Because you can't patent that stuff or copyright it, because then everyone would see what it is, and someone would just work around it and say, oh, that patent's no good. Look, I made this twist and that tweak, and it's different. So you can't. What you have is your intellectual property, and you have to keep that to yourself. So Yes, we were very successful, continue to be. As I say, there are others, but very few investment operations are 100%, because this is 100% model driven. It's not 90% or 80%. Some people have models and for advice. They say, what does the model say? Oh yeah, let's go. Oh, I don't forget that. I don't want to pay attention to that. So, Renaissance is 100% model driven. No trade is ever made because someone walks into the trading room and says, hey, let's buy IBM. It's a sure winner, or anything like that. We got too much Google. We got to show it. Nobody does that. It may be that we had too much Google, but nonetheless, he might have been right. But it's just what the model says. And that religious sticking to the model is the only way you can run such a business, because you cannot simulate that guy who walked in and said, hey, Google's too high, let's sell it. How can you simulate that? You don't know what might have happened. But you can simulate, you can come up with a model or a new predictor, and you can simulate it in the past and see how did it do. So you have to stick to it.
I know you guys made the model, so you do have the ownership of it and feel proud of it. But is it hard to follow the model religiously? Like, is it hard for your ego to think all the success is because of the computer? Like, and I just sat there and watched?
No, the computer's just a tool that we use to. I mean, it's a good cabinet maker doesn't say it's all because of my wonderful chisel. You may have great film equipment, but that's not why you're a success at doing what you're doing. You're working with good equipment, but another guy would make a mess of it with the same equipment. So no, we don't feel, oh, the computer is doing everything. The computer does what you tell it to do.
Mathematics is very collaborative, and things that are learned are built upon by sharing. Are you learning things behind the locked doors at Renaissance that could help mathematics, but you're not sharing because you want to keep them a secret to help the business?
No. There's nothing. There's nothing that we're learning behind locked doors in Renaissance that would help the general field of mathematics or the general field of science, as far as I can tell.
Do you think there's something about your personality that made you able to do it, or is it just luck?
Well, I think a lot of it's luck. I probably have a good personality for running a group of people, but there are other people who maybe even have a better personality for doing that. We underestimate the role of luck. It's typical that if someone fails at something, he'll say, I had bad luck. And if he makes a success, he'll say, I was a smart guy. And, I was just lucky. People don't usually say that if they make a big success. And of course, obviously, not everyone can make a big success, but I think that luck played a role. I was in the right place at the right time. But I think what I'm good at is getting good people to work together.
So it was more, you would think it was more your managerial ability than your mathematical genius that resulted in the business?
It definitely wasn't my mathematical genius. I think I'm a pretty smart guy. I can understand this stuff. So, but I wasn't, and I did come up with a few predictive algorithms, so that was fine. But many people did. I knew I wasn't going to come up with all of them, so that's why we have all these folks. So it wasn't my mathematical genius, but I think people respected me because I was a good scientist. So they said, well, he may act stupid, but we know he's really smart. So
you had a few runs on the board, they would say.
Yeah.
Given that you will put some of it down to luck, what are you more proud of? All of this in the business or the mathematics from that first half of your career?
Oh, to the extent that I'm proud, I think I'm proud of both. I think, I've done some mathematics and some of it's had a positive effect, and I guess I'm proud of that. And I've built a nice business and I'm proud of that. I don't say I'm prouder of one than the other. And now for the last number of years, I've been working with my wife on this foundation, which she started actually in '94 with my money, but nonetheless, she started the foundation. And then I joined. I got more and more involved with the foundation as time went on, and now that's my main thing, and I'm pretty proud of the foundation.
Let me focus you more on the mathematics versus the business then. Would you trade any or all of your business success for being the man who cracked the Riemann hypothesis or something like that?
No, that's a good question. Would I trade that for? Well, I'd probably trade some of it. I mean, for the Riemann hypothesis. It would certainly, I guess, be a thrill to solve the Riemann hypothesis. I'm pleased mostly with the way my career has gone. Would I trade part of it for something? I don't know. I've never looked back and said, I wish, at least in business, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I had done this and not that, whatever it is. I've never looked back that way.
I guess the thing I'm getting at is, what do you define yourself as, a businessman or a mathematician?
Well, I would not be very good at running an ordinary business. If I had to run a big manufacturing business or something like that, I don't think I'd be very good at it. There's a level of detail that I would find tedious. I'm not the best organized person in the world, and frankly, I would be bored. So I'm not your typical businessman. The kind of business that I did run was very natural to me. So in that sense, I was a businessman. I like business, sort of. I always say, what's the important mathematics skill in business is subtraction. You have to understand when your revenues are going to exceed your costs. Some people, they just look at revenues. Hey, we're wrong. Yeah, but you're losing money every day. Well, that'll take care of itself after a while. So, but I don't think I'd be. I once had to, for about 6 months, run a small business in the computer area, a business that we had started, or invested in, and then it wasn't going well, and we had to get rid of the head and find someone new. And I found myself running it for about 3 to 6 months, commuting to Philadelphia. And I came to the conclusion I'm doing a better job than the guy was there before, but I'm not doing a very good job. And I found myself in business meetings like with the distributor from St. Louis and I remember saying, what am I doing, spending my time with some distributor from St. Louis? I mean, this is not the way I want to run my life. Finally, we got someone in. He really knew how to run a business, and then that was that kind of a business. The foundation is focused on support of scientific research, primarily basic science, but not completely, because we have a large autism project, which involves a lot of basic science, but the treatments are a goal. But the rest is support of mathematics, physics, computer science, biology of all sorts, neuroscience, genetics. We support basic science, and that's what we like to do. There's a certain amount of outreach. We have a Math for America program. We spend maybe 10 or 15% on outreach and education, but 85% is support of basic science.
Almost the nature of basic mathematical research is you can't really know where it's going to go.
Right. That's right.
So what are you throwing money at a wall and seeing what sticks, or how targeted are you about it?
Well, to some extent, yes. We have investigator grants, which give outstanding mathematicians and physicists and computer scientists a 10-year run, where they have support for 10 years, and they can use that money for a postdoc or something like that to help their work along. We don't know what work it's going to be. We have no idea. Well, we know what the guy has done, but it's not. These are very, very competitive, and they're just the best people, and it's helping their careers, whatever they might do. We also have collaborative projects that we support. There is a goal, but it can be a rather vague goal, like one is origins of life. Well, we'd like to know how we all got here. How did life originate? Outside, inside, what was the path to life? So there's, 40 or 50 people working on that, and it's a very exciting project. We're making some progress. So there's a goal, but do I think that in the next 5 years we're going to know everything about the origin? No, I don't think so. But we'll learn more about this path that started with, primitive organic molecules and ended up with an interview like this one. So there is a goal, but it's a relatively vague goal.
This model of philanthropy, of supporting the basic research and not knowing where it's going to end up, almost seems the opposite of what you were talking about with your business.
Totally.
You were talking about with business, revenues and costs and making sure.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. When we would bring smart guys into Renaissance, we didn't know what they were going to do. We hoped that they'd come up with some good ideas to make the firm better. But I didn't say, this guy is going to I want this guy to discover this thing. I don't know what he's going to discover. But it's of course very focused on a narrow set of outcomes, whereas the other basic science, anything goes, is very different from that.
What's your attitude to risk? Because you almost have created a business that's based on removing risk. Reducing risk. And yet you took a risk by leaving tenure to go and start business. Yeah. I mean, are you a risk taker, or are you a risk minimizer? Or were you? You probably don't need to worry about it.
Well, I suppose as we get older, we get a little more risk averse. I don't know. I'd always been something of a risk taker, I think. But I've had good taste, and especially, again, as I say, in people, and have pretty much always partnered up with people. So that cuts the risk. So, but I did. I certainly, when I started the company, I had to finance it myself, and I didn't know whether it would succeed or not. But I was pretty sure it would, but I didn't know.
You put a lot of money into mathematics, so you've got some right to comment on it. How are you feeling about it?
Oh, I think mathematics is really going quite well worldwide, the research end of it. A lot of new ideas are coming up, new fields sort of are flourishing. It feels like a pretty healthy enterprise to me. What's not healthy is the state of mathematics education in our country. That's very unhealthy for young people. That's why we started this thing called Math for America and so on. But we don't have enough teachers of mathematics who know it, who know the subject, and even of science. And that's for a simple reason. 30, 40 years ago, if you knew some mathematics, enough to teach, let's say, in high school, there weren't a million other things you could do with that knowledge. Maybe you could become a professor, but let's suppose you're not quite at that level, but you were good at math and so on. Being a math teacher was a nice job. But today, if you know that much mathematics, you can get a job at Google, you can get a job at IBM, you can get a job at Goldman Sachs. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities that are going to pay more than being a high school teacher, right? There weren't so many when I was going to high school, such things. So the quality of high school teachers in math has declined simply because if you know enough to teach in high school, you know enough to work for Google. And, they're not going to pay that much in high school. So how do you redress that? How do we redress that as a country? So a person works for a combination of financial reward and respect, right? So a guy becomes Supreme Court Justice. He's not doing it because he's going to make a fortune. He'll be well paid, I suppose, but, Supreme Court Justice, everyone says, that's a big deal. You have a lot of respect, and you respect yourself, presumably. So there are many, so you can't pay, let's say, high school teachers of math as much as they would get at Google, but you can give them a bump, pay them more. We give people $15,000 a year more than they would make their regular salary. But we also create a community of math and science teachers, which they love, and it makes them feel important, and they are important. They interact with each other. They're not forlorn, stuck in some high school, no one to talk to. So we've created a community with the greatest esprit de corps. And these people don't walk out of the field. The turnover is very, very low, whereas ordinarily the turnover is quite high. So in Finland, for example, which has very good mathematics teaching, those are real professionals, and they have a lot of status, societal status, a teacher in Finland. Here in the United States, teachers don't have such good societal status. And of course, the whole thing of getting rid of these bad teachers, or get them out, and so on and so forth. Okay, maybe we have some bad teachers. But there's nothing said about, hey, let's reward and recognize the really good ones, right? So if you're running a business, yeah, you want to get rid of the deadwood if there are people who just aren't doing the job. But more important is to recognize the people who are doing a good job and reward them and extol them and make them feel good in one way or another. We don't do that at all with teachers. We're just bashing them and bashing them and bashing them.
Why has that happened in the United States, but not in Finland?
Well, and it hasn't happened in most of the European countries. Why? Well, for one thing, we have teachers' unions, but that shouldn't be the reason, because Finland probably has unions too. I don't know. There's been a shift, and it's maybe started about 10 years ago, that we have to measure these teachers by outcomes. All right, fair enough. Well, what outcome? Oh, well, we're going to give their students standardized tests. If they have value added and so on, well, then they're good. And if they don't have value, well, it turns out judging people on student standardized tests is a disaster. It's a very, very weak statistic. It's not very highly correlated with how they're going to do the next year by the same measure. But somehow the theory is we have to measure these people. If they're not doing a good job, we have to get rid of them somehow or other. We have to get these people out of the schools. Well, there's an old saying in the British Navy, floggings will continue until morale improves. And that's kind of what this is. We're just beating these people up. So how did it start? I don't know. Someone got the idea that we can measure output, but we can't, or at least we've imposed a system which stinks for measuring output. And the longer we stick with the system of rating teachers on performance of their students on standardized tests, the worse it's going to get. And
the solution, as you put it, sounds to me like just respect them a bit more and make them feel good about themselves.
Yeah, and recognize and reward the very best ones. And that encourages people to say, hey, I could get that. Maybe I could rise up and get one of those, become a master teacher or whatever. Or someone could even come into the field and say, hey, my cousin is a master teacher there at New York. He's having a good life. So, yes, but it's going to take we're doing it in New York pretty successfully, but it needs to be all around the country, and it needs to be bigger than it is in New York, too.
You seem to be a believer in markets and that, though. Is this not something that would correct itself, like over time, like if the teaching drops and then Google can't get the mathematicians and they have to improve the teaching? Will this not take care of itself? Does it need third parties?
No. Here's how we're taking care of it now. We're importing people, H-1 visas, and we're bringing in guys from other countries who do have this knowledge, and all the technology companies only want more and more H-1 visas because they can't get enough homegrown talent, the talent that they need. So now that's okay for a while, but about 12 or 13 years ago, for example, of the graduates from the Indian Institute of Technology, whatever they call it, Indian IIT, about 80% of them left India and would come to Europe and the United States to get jobs. Now it's 20%. Because India is doing much better. There's plenty of technical jobs in India, so hey, I can stay home. I don't have to run to England, or I don't have to run to the United States to work. So, well, there are people from other countries who are coming, and we're taking advantage of that, but they will come when we just won't have enough people here, of our own folks, who know enough to do this work. Basic research is, as I have said, the sort of the wellspring of human knowledge about our world. But the federal funding for basic research has become restricted. For one thing, federal funding for science has come down anyway, overall. And second of all, there's an increasing tendency for these agencies to fund what's called translational research rather than basic research. Translational means, okay, you're working on cancer, great, we're going to have a cure for this in 3 years. Yeah, okay, fine, we'll give you money. You're working on how the basic cell is working, the applications are too far away. So there's less, the Congress pushes the NIH and the NSF too probably to, hey, we want to see some return on this money. We want to see results. So they're more conservative. Wild ideas less often get funded because, So the government's not doing such a good job at supporting basic science. And so there's a role for philanthropy, an increasingly important role for philanthropy.
Do you give your money to basic research because you feel somehow indebted to it for your own success, or do you do it just out of like a belief? Or do you feel like you're giving something back to what gave something to you?
That's an interesting question. I do it because it feels good. I like science. I like to see it flourish. I like to be around scientists. I like to learn some new things. And my wife feels the same way. She loves science. So we're very happy to do this. Do I feel I'm giving back? Not especially. I could give back in a lot of ways. There's other things I could do besides support science.
Do you have a favorite number?
7. Next question.
Do you have a favorite mathematician?
Well, Archimedes and Euler are my current favorites. But maybe you met somebody. I'm very impressed with those two guys.
Thank you so much for so much of your time. It was really
All right, well, this was kind of fun.
Big dreams start small.
Pretty good.
From getting your domain to creating your website, email, and online security, we've got you covered. You don't need to be a tech expert. You just need a starting point. Your brand starts here with GoDaddy.
Watch another one. If there's another one that pops up, maybe.
You were something of a mathematical phenom. You had already taught at Harvard and MIT at a young age. And then the NSA came calling. What was that about?
Well, the NSA didn't exactly, that's the National Security Agency. It didn't exactly come calling. They had an operation in Princeton where they hired mathematicians to attack secret codes and stuff like that. And I knew that existed. And it had a very good policy because you could do half your time at your own mathematics and at least half your time working on their stuff. And they paid a lot. So that was an irresistible pull. So I went there.
So you were a code cracker until you got fired.
Well, I did get fired, yes.
How come?
Well, how come? I got fired because, well, the Vietnam War was on, and the boss of bosses in my organization was a big fan of the war and wrote a New York Times article, magazine section cover story about how we're going to win in Vietnam and so on. I didn't like that war. I thought it was stupid, and I wrote a letter to the Times, which they published, saying not everyone who works for, it was Maxwell Taylor, if anyone remembers that name, works for General Taylor, agrees with his views. And I gave my own views.
Okay, so that, I can see that would...
Which were different from General Taylor's. But on the other hand, nobody said anything. But then, I was 29 years old at this time, and some kid came around and said he was a stringer from Newsweek magazine, and he wanted to interview me and ask what I was doing about my views. And I told him that, I'm doing mostly mathematics now, and when the war is over, then I'll do mostly their stuff. Then I did the only intelligent thing I'd done that day. I told my local boss that I gave that interview. And he said, what did you say? And I told him what I said. And then he said, I got to call Taylor. He called Taylor. That took 10 minutes. I was fired 5 minutes after that.
Okay.
So, but it wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad, because you went on to Stony Brook and stepped up your mathematical career. And you started working with this man here. Who is this?
Oh, Chern. Yeah, Chern was one of the great mathematicians of the century. I had known him when I was a graduate student, actually, at Berkeley. And I had some ideas, and I brought them to him, and he liked them. And together, we did this work, which you can easily see up there. There it is. And
it led to you publishing a famous paper together. Can you explain at all what that work was?
No.
Oh. Can you explain
I
this?
could explain it to somebody, but,
well, how about explaining this?
but not many people.
I think you told me it had something to do with spheres. So let's start here.
Well, it did, but I'll say about that work, it did have something to do with that. But before we get to that work was good mathematics. I was very happy with it. So was Chern. It even started a little subfield that's now flourishing. But more interestingly, it happened to apply to physics, something we knew nothing about. At least I knew nothing about physics, and I don't think Chern knew a heck of a lot. And about 10 years after the paper came out, a guy named Ed Witten in Princeton started applying it to string theory, and people in Russia started applying it to what's called condensed matter. And today, those things in there called Chern-Simons invariants spread through a lot of physics. And it was amazing. We didn't know any physics. It never occurred to me that it would be applied to physics. But that's the thing about mathematics. You never know where it's going to go.
But this is so incredible. So we've been talking about how evolution shapes human minds that may or may not perceive the truth. Somehow, you come up with a mathematical theory, not knowing any physics, discover 2 decades later that it's being applied to profoundly describe the actual physical world.
Yeah.
How can that happen?
God knows. Yeah, but there was a famous physicist named Wigner, and he wrote an essay on the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. So somehow this mathematics, which is rooted in the real world in some sense, we learn to count and measure, that kind of, everyone would do that. And then it flourishes on its own. But so often it comes back to save the day. General relativity is an example. Minkowski had this geometry, and Einstein realized, hey, it's the very thing in which I can cast general relativity. So you never know. And so it is a mystery. It is a mystery.
So here's a mathematical piece of ingenuity here. Tell us about this.
Yeah. Well, that's a ball. It's a sphere, and it has a lattice around it, those squares, sort of things. And what I'm going to show here was originally observed by Euler, a great mathematician, in the 1700s. And it gradually grew to be a very important field in mathematics, algebraic topology, and geometry. And that paper up there had its roots in this. So here's this thing. It has 8 vertices and 12 edges and 6 faces. And if you look at the difference, vertices minus edges plus faces, you get 2. Okay, well, 2, that's a good number. Oh, here's a different way of doing it. These are triangles covering. Oh, this has 12 vertices and 30 edges and 20 faces, 20 tiles, and vertices minus edges plus faces still equals 2. And in fact, you could do this any which way. Cover this thing with all kinds of polygons and triangles and mix them up. And you take vertices minus edges plus faces, you'll get 2. Now here's a different shape. This is a torus, or the surface of a donut. 16 vertices covered by these rectangles, 32 edges, 16 faces. Hey, this comes out 0, vertices minus edges. It'll always come out 0. Every time you cover a torus with squares or triangles or anything like that, you're going to get 0 when you take that thing. So this is called the Euler characteristic, and it's what's called a topological invariant. Now, it's pretty amazing. No matter how you do it, you're always going to get the same answer. So that was the first sort of thrust from the mid-1700s into a subject which is now called algebraic topology.
And your own work took an idea like this and moved it into higher dimensional theory. You looked at higher dimensional objects and found new invariances?
Yes. Well, there were already higher dimensional invariants, Pontryagin classes. Actually, there were Chern classes. There were a bunch of these types of invariants. But I was struggling to work on one of them and model it sort of combinatorially instead of the way it was typically done. And that led to this work, and we uncovered some new things. But if it wasn't for Mr. Euler, who wrote almost 70 volumes of mathematics, had 13 children whom he apparently would dandle on his knee while he was writing. So if it wasn't for Mr. Euler, well, there wouldn't perhaps be these invariants.
Okay, so that's at least given us a flavor of that amazing mind in there. Let's talk about Renaissance, because you took that amazing mind, and having been a co-cracker at the NSA, you started to become a co-cracker of the financial industry. I think you probably didn't buy efficient market theory, and somehow you found a way of creating these astonishing returns over 2 decades. I think the way it's been explained to me, what's remarkable about what you did was that it wasn't just the size of the returns, it was that you took them with surprisingly low volatility and risk compared with other hedge funds. So how on earth did you do this, Jim?
Well, I did it by assembling a wonderful group of people. When I started doing trading, I got a little tired of mathematics. I was in my late 30s. I had a little money. I started trading, and it went very well. I made quite a lot of money with pure luck. I mean, I think it was pure luck. It certainly wasn't mathematical modeling. But in looking at the data, after a while, I realized, hey, looks like there's some structure here. And I hired a few mathematicians, and we started trying to make some models. Just the kind of thing we did back at IDA. You design an algorithm, you test it out on a computer, does it work, doesn't it work, and so on.
So can we take a look at this? Because I mean, here's a typical graph of some commodity or whatever. I mean, I look at that and I say, that's just a random up and down walk, maybe a slight upward trend over that whole period of time. How on earth could you look at that and see something that wasn't just random?
It turns out in the old days, and this is kind of a graph from the old days, commodities or currencies had a tendency to trend. Not necessarily the very light trend you see here, but trending in periods. And if you decided, okay, I'm going to predict today by the average move in the past 20 days, there's 20 days, maybe that would be a good prediction and I'd make some money. And in fact, years ago, such a system would work. Not beautifully, but it would work. So you'd make money, you'd lose money, you'd make money, but this is a year's worth of days, and you'd make a little money during that period. But it's a very vestigial system.
So you would test a bunch of different sort of lengths of trends in time and see whether, for example, a 10-day trend or a 15-day trend was predictive of what happened next?
Sure. You would try all those things and see what worked best. But the trend following would have been great in the 60s, and it was sort of okay in the 70s. By the 80s, it wasn't such a...
It didn't, because everyone could...
Yeah, a lot of people did.
So what happened? So how did you stay ahead of the pack?
Well, we stayed ahead of the pack by finding other approaches and shorter-term approaches to some extent. But the real thing was to gather a tremendous amount of data, and we had to get it by hand in the early days. We went down to the Federal Reserve and copied interest rate histories and stuff like that because it didn't exist on computers. We got a lot of data and very smart people, and that was the key. I didn't really know how to hire people to do fundamental trading. I had hired a few, some made money, some didn't make money. I couldn't make a business out of that, but I didn't know how to hire scientists because I have some taste in that department. And so that's what we did. And gradually, the models got better and better and better and better.
I mean, I think you're credited with doing something remarkable at Renaissance, which is building this culture or this group of people who weren't just hired guns who could be lured away by money. Their motivation was doing exciting mathematics and science.
Well, I hope that might be true, but some of it was money.
They made a lot of money.
I can't say that no one came because of the money. I think a lot of them came because of the money, but they also came because it would be fun.
What role did machine learning play in all this?
Well, in a certain sense, what we did was machine learning. You look at a lot of data and you try to simulate different predictive schemes until you get better and better at it. It doesn't necessarily feed back on itself the way we did things, but it worked.
So these different predictive schemes can be really quite wild, quite unexpected. I mean, you look at everything, right? You look at weather, length of dresses, political opinion.
Length of dresses we didn't try, but...
what sort of things?
Well, everything. I mean, everything is grist for the mill, except hem lengths, I have to say. Whether annual reports, monthly, quarterly reports, the historic data itself, volumes, you name it, whatever there is. We take in terabytes of data a day and store it away and massage it and get it ready for analysis. And you're looking for anomalies. You're looking for, like you said, the efficient market hypothesis.
But any one anomaly might be just a random thing. So is the secret here to just look at multiple strange anomalies and see when they align?
Well, any one anomaly might be a random thing. However, if you have enough data, you can tell that it's not. So you can see an anomaly that's persisted for a sufficiently long time, so that the probability of it being random is not high. But these things fade after a while. Anomalies can get washed out, so you have to keep on top of the business.
A lot of people look at the hedge fund industry now and are sort of...
If you struggle with focus, this sound might change everything.
shocked by it, by how much wealth is created there and how much talent is going into it. Do you have
I
any
knew I
worries
was going to
about,
make it. I just ain't know
that
how.
industry and perhaps the financial industry in general?
But I knew. This world is what you make it. You create your own environment. It all starts with a vision. What you can imagine, you can create.
Can imagine you can create. Fuck, dude, I forgot.
General, kind of being on a runaway train that's I don't know, helping increase inequality, or how would you
It's got Jim Simons in it a few times. So that last interview we watched, there's a segment of him that's in this sound, and I just want to surround myself with people ahead of me. I have to. No offense to the people in the chat, but the whole public being able to get into my brain ain't with me. So I like to be around people that can push me to be great. So
champion what's
Well,
happening
actually,
in
I think in the last 3 or 4 years, hedge funds have not done especially well. We've done dandy, but the hedge fund industry as a whole has not done so wonderfully. The stock market has been on a roll going up, as everybody knows, and price-earnings ratios have grown. So an awful lot of the wealth that's been created in the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years has not been created by hedge funds. So it's just another, people ask me, what's a hedge fund? And I say, 1 in 20. I mean, which means now it's 2 in 20. It's 2% fixed fee and 20% of profits. Hedge funds are all different kind of creatures.
Rumor has it you charge slightly higher fees than that.
We charge the highest fees in the world at one time. 5 and 44. That's what we charge.
5 and 44.
Yeah, 5% fixed fee.
5% flat, 44% of upside. But you still made your investors spectacular
We
amounts of
made
money.
good returns, yes. People got very mad at my investors. How can you charge such high fees? I said, okay, you can withdraw, but no, how can I get more was what but how can I get more? But at a certain point, as I think I told you, we bought out all the investors because there's a capacity. There's a capacity to the
But should we worry about the hedge fund industry attracting too much of the world's great mathematical and other talent to work on that, as opposed to the many other problems in
Well,
the
it's
world?
not just mathematics. We hired astronomers and physicists and things like that. I don't think we should worry about it too much. It's still a pretty small industry, and in fact, bringing in science into the investing world has improved that world. It's reduced volatility. It's increased liquidity. Spreads are narrower because people are trading that kind of stuff. So I'm not too worried about Einstein going off and starting a hedge fund.
Now, you're at a phase in your life now where you're actually investing, though, at the other end of the supply chain, in actually boosting mathematics across America. Here's your wife, Marilyn, and you're working on philanthropic issues together. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah, we are. Marilyn started, there she is up there, my beautiful wife. She started the foundation about 20 years ago, I think 94. I claim it was 93, she says it was 94, but it was one of those 2 years. We started the foundation. And just as a convenient way to give charity, she kept the books and so on. And we did not have a vision at that time, but gradually a vision emerged, which was to focus on math and science, to focus on basic research. And that's what we've done. And 6 years ago or so, I left Renaissance and went to work at the foundation. So that's what we do.
And so Math for America here is basically investing in math teachers around the country, giving them some extra income and giving them support and coaching and really trying to make that more effective and make that a calling to which teachers can aspire.
It's instead of beating up the bad teachers, which has created morale problems all through the educational community, in particular in math and science, we focus on celebrating the good ones and giving them status. Yeah, we give them extra money, $15,000 a year. We have 800 math and science teachers in New York City in the public schools today as part of the core. There's a great morale among them. They're staying in the field. Next year it'll be 1,000, and that'll be 10% of the math and science teachers in New York public schools. And that's...
And Jim, here's another project that you've supported philanthropically, research into origins of life, I guess. What are we looking at here?
Well, I'll save that for a second, and then I'll tell you what you're looking at. But so origins of life is a fascinating question. How do we get here? What's a root? Well, there's 2 questions. So one is, what is the root from geology to biology. How did we get here? And the other question is, what did we start with? What material, if any, did we have to work with on this route? Those are two very, very interesting questions. The first question is a tortuous path from geology up to RNA or something like that. How did that all work? And the other, what do we have to work with? Well, more than we think. So what's pictured there is a star in formation. Now, every year in our Milky Way, which has 100 billion stars, about 2 new stars are created. Don't ask me how, but they're created. And it takes them about 1 million years to settle out. So in steady state, there's about 2 million stars in formation at any time. That one is somewhere along the settling down period, and there's all this crap sort of circling around it, dust and stuff. And it'll form probably a solar system or whatever it forms. But here's the thing. In this dust that surrounds a forming star have been found now significant organic molecules. Molecules not just like methane, but formaldehyde and cyanide, things that are the building blocks, the seeds, if you will, of life. So that may be typical. And it may be typical that planets around the universe start off with some of these basic building blocks. Now, does that mean, oh, well, there's going to be life all around? Maybe. But it's a question of how tortuous this path is from those frail beginnings, those seeds, all the way to life. And most of those seeds will fall on fallow planets. But
so for you personally, finding an answer to this question of where we came from, how did this thing happen, that is something you would love to see.
I'd love to see. I'd love to see. And I'd like to know, if that path is tortuous enough and so improbable that no matter what you start with, we could be a singularity. But on the other hand, given all this organic dust that's floating around, we could have lots of friends out there. Be great to know.
Jim, a couple of years ago, I got a chance to speak with Elon Musk and asked him the secret of his success, really, and he said taking physics seriously was it. Listening to you, what I hear you saying is, taking math seriously, that has infused your whole life. It's made you an absolute fortune, and now it's allowing you to invest in the futures of thousands and thousands of kids across America and elsewhere. Could it be that science actually works, that math actually works?
Well, math certainly works. Math certainly works. And, but this has been fun. Working with Marilyn and giving it away has been very enjoyable.
I just find it's an inspirational thought to me that by taking knowledge seriously, so much more can come from it. So thank you for your amazing life and for coming here to TED.
Okay.
Really. Thank you. Jim Simon.
Jim Simon, baby. We on a Jimmy Saturday. This is the Jimmy Saturday. What else we got, bro? Common sense, mathematics, common sense, and good luck.
Welcome to this evening main event or only event. And so this will be, this is part, as you know, of the American Mathematical Society meeting of the Western section that's taking place on campus this weekend. And it's also part of the Bay Area Science Festival. And it's co-sponsored by the American Math Society, the Bay Area Science Festival, and Mathematics.
Again? My bad. Island life. This is me, dude. I think this is my bad. But you saw it earlier.
Welcome to this.
Doing some weird stuff.
But was a physicist and joined the physics department in Stony Brook in 1957, just 1 year after it started. Stony Brook is a great place now, but it had growing pains. And at one point, the math department was in such terrible shape that the provost felt he needed to have a committee of outsiders to find a new chair, and that no one in the department would do. So they went searching for an outside chair. Various people applied, and my father was on the committee that was to make the choice. And they made some pretty questionable choices. Among them, this inexperienced young guy, Jim Simons, who'd never done any administration before and really was too young for the job. And they interviewed the candidates, and the provost, when he interviewed Jim, according to Jim, said, of all the people I've interviewed, you're the only one who actually seems to want the job. And indeed, nobody else took the job, and Jim did. Talk about luck for Stony Brook. I feel I've been touched by that luck, too, in getting to know Jim. PhD from Berkeley in 1958 with Bertram Costin, whom I saw in the audience a moment ago. Where's Bertram Costin? Somewhere around, unless he left again. 61. Oh, your Wikipedia entry is questionable. He was the winner of the AMS Veblen Prize in 1976. Is that the right date? He discovered that minimal manifolds can have singularities, starting in dimension 7. Not such an obvious construction. Now very famous for Chern-Simons theory, which is applied in math and physics in all kinds of unexpected ways. In 1982, a change of life, he founded Renaissance Technologies. And in some sense, the amazing chapter, really even more amazing chapter started then. He did nothing but use math and a lot of talented people's work to become one of the richest men on earth, and has now been sharing his wealth and his luck with the rest of us who are here. And now we'll all share the luck again in listening to Jim himself. Jim.
This is a high thing. Okay, I guess you can hear me. Thank you very much for such a nice introduction. So I'm going to kind of talk about my life and its various paginations. Some of it about math and some of it about common sense and some of it about good luck. And then I'll take some questions. if there are any. So I always liked math when I was a little kid. I didn't think of it as math, just numbers and having fun. But I discovered Zeno's, so this is proof of my thoughtfulness as a child. I discovered Zeno's paradox at about 4 years old, not knowing it was anybody's paradox or not knowing what the word paradox meant. But I learned from my father, to my horror, that a car could run out of gasoline. And I said, well, it shouldn't run out. You could use half of what you have, and then you could use half of that, and then you could use half of that, and you'll never run out. And it didn't occur to me that you'd never get anywhere either. But on the other hand, my family doctor, Dr. Kaplan, he knew I was a bright boy, and he said, well, you're a bright Jewish boy, you should be a doctor. That's a great field. And I wanted nothing less than to be a doctor. And I said, well, I don't really want to be a doctor. I want to do something like with engineering or math or something. I didn't know much. I was about 8 years old. And he said, well, you can't make any money doing that stuff. And I said, and it didn't seem to be very much of an impediment at 8 years old. I wasn't thinking about making a lot of money. I was just thinking that I did not want to be a doctor, which was a very good choice for me. And it turns out for anyone who would have had the unfortunateness to be my patient, because I would not have done a very good job. But I did like working, and my first job was as a stock boy in Breck's Garden Supply during the Christmas season. They hired kids, a few people, and I got this job. A stock boy works down in the basement in this particular place, looking.
If you want a pair of shoes and they're at the store, they're really at the store. You just don't have it yet. It ain't like that shit don't exist. It's just really at the store. That's how I looked at my whole life. If I want it, if I believe I can have it, then that's my reality.
Where anything went. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason, no order. It wasn't alphabetized or anything like that. You just had to know where things were. So the two people who ran it down there realized I was a failure as a stock boy, but I was there, so they said, okay, you can sweep the floor. And I loved that job. So then I had a big push broom and sawdust, and I could throw the sawdust on the floor and push the broom and walk up and down, keeping the floors clean and thinking, which I enjoyed doing very much. And it came to the end, and Christmas was past, and it was time for me to leave. So this couple sat me down and said goodbye and so on, and asked me what I was going to do. I was, I think, 14. And I said, oh, I'm going to study mathematics. I think I want to go to MIT. Well, they laughed very, very hard. And I'm sure they were thinking, this kid who doesn't even know where the dried sheep manure is going to go to MIT and study mathematics. Well, I did. I never got back to them and said, see, I did that. But I did. And I went to MIT and did study mathematics and realized that one could be a mathematician. But I really had an epiphany when I learned Stokes' theorem. Now, I guess you're all mathematicians, so you probably know Stokes' theorem. You integrate one thing over a boundary and you take its differential, and that's the same as integrating that over the interior of something. And that, it's a great generalization of the fundamental theorem of calculus and works at all dimensions. And I thought it was the most beautiful thing, that theorem. And it really made me appreciate mathematics. It made me want to go into this field of differential geometry, which I had sort of gradually learned existed. And what sealed the deal was a delicatessen called Jack and Marion's in Boston. It's not there anymore, I'm afraid, but it was quite a place, and it was open very late at night. And as an undergraduate, we used to go there and hang out and eat, maybe at 2 in the morning, because young kids can eat at all hours, as some of you perhaps remember. But frequently, is Singer and Warren Ambrose, I guess everyone's heard of Singer. Ambrose was an older fellow. He must have been 50. He seemed ancient to me, although he was a great teacher. They would show up there and work. They'd go over to some booth and drink coffee and do mathematics. And I thought, my God, what a great life. Here are these grown-ups, and they're doing this stuff. They didn't dress in suits. They just had, regular outdoor clothes. And said, what a life this is. 2 in the morning, over sandwiches, talking about math. So it was clear that was for me. I graduated MIT. I graduated early, but I stayed one more year at graduate school. But when I graduated, which was in 1958, see, that's where the 58 came from. Where was David? He confused those dates. 58. I did something that was actually an example of having no common sense at all, but it turned out that there was some good luck involved. In those days, motor scooters had just been becoming popular, Vespas, and they were Italian. It was either a Vespa or a Lambretta. Those were the two choices you had. And we decided, I and a friend from Colombia, South America, an MIT friend, who was not a mathematician, we decided to ride our motor scooters. We get motor scooters. We didn't have them. We didn't even know how to ride motor scooters, but we felt it couldn't be that difficult. We're going to ride them from Boston to Buenos Aires. Yeah, well, Boston, they both began with B, Boston to Buenos Aires. And we got the motor scooters, and a third guy joined the gang. And we did get halfway. We got to Bogota, and that took 7 weeks. And I at least almost died. I came extremely close to death. I think I never told my mother that. If my mother had the slightest idea of how dangerous that trip was, she wouldn't let me go, but for some reason she did. And so I got there. Now, one of the themes of this talk is how important partners are and people that you work with. And so this fellow, this Colombian boy, and his friend, subsequently became my first partners in a business venture, which I'll get to in a minute. But so it was lucky on that account, but it showed little signs of common sense. Anyway, I spent 1 year at MIT as a graduate student. They thought I'd been at MIT long enough that I should go to Berkeley and meet Chern, the great geometer of the day, and get a proper education in differential geometry, since that's what I seem to like. So I went there, and I got a nice fellowship. I went to Berkeley. The only thing is that Chern did not go to Berkeley. Chern was coming to Berkeley that year. That's why they said I should go there too. But Chern, perhaps knowing I was coming, decided to go somewhere else for that year. I guess he was on sabbatical or something. So I didn't see Chern. But I worked with Costin. Someone told me Bert Costin was here. Is he here? No, he's not here. I think maybe you didn't really see him. But anyway, I worked with a fellow named Bert Costin. But the first thing that I did when I got to Berkeley, or very early, was, I got married, actually. I got married within a month of getting there, and there was a wedding, and we even got wedding presents, and so, which were cash. So we had some money, and I thought, well, it's just lying there. We should invest it. I didn't know anything at all about investing, but I knew that one could invest money. So I went to Merrill Lynch, and I was, now I was 21 years old, and said I wanted to open an account, and there were two stocks that I thought would be just terrific, and I wanted to buy these stocks. Well, they said, okay, and I bought the stocks, but I'm an impatient guy, and after a month, nothing happened. They didn't go down, they didn't go up, they didn't go anywhere, so I was bored with that thing. So I went back and said, isn't there something that's a little more lively and that I could, you have any ideas? Like, oh, yeah, he said, soybeans, you should buy soybeans. And I had heard of soybeans. I'd never eaten one myself. It turns out perhaps most people haven't ever eaten a soybean, but pigs eat them in great quantities, and cows and so on. But I said, well, what does that mean exactly? He said, well, you buy 5,000 bushels. That's a contract. It's a futures market. Our guys tell us soybeans are going through the roof. You'll make a lot of money. I said, okay. So I bought 2 contracts of soybeans, and they did. They went up. I was making money. They went down. I was losing money. I sold them both. I got nervous, and I bought one contract. Meanwhile, I was going back and forth from Berkeley into San Francisco early in the morning to watch the soybean market. And, early. It was, 8 o'clock in the morning already. I was out. I mean, that was very early for a graduate student. And after a couple of weeks, I came to the most sensible conclusion of my life, I think. I said, I'm either going to write a thesis or trade soybeans, because you couldn't possibly do both. And I came to that realization at a good point. I had a very small profit. I said, okay, I'm closing out the profit. And it was years before I ever traded a soybean again, although the occasion did arise. So then I went and worked on it. I mean, you couldn't do both. You couldn't write a thesis and trade soybeans. Anyway, I couldn't. So I did write a thesis, and it was a very gratifying experience. I wrote it. I'm sorry Bert's not here. But so I got some results, which I showed to my professor. And he said, oh, those are very interesting. That's nice. Suggests that a question that's open about holonomy groups. Anyone know what a holonomy group is? Probably a lot of you know. Anyway, okay. Yes? Okay, some of you. Anyway, it's a group that's associated to a connection on a manifold. Let's say in the tangent bundle, you can parallel translate all around and come back to where you started, and you move the tangent space. And it had just been shown all the possible, and that's a Lie group. It's a linear group of linear transformations. And it had recently been shown that there was a list of all the possible candidates for holonomy groups on an irreducible manifold, one you couldn't write as a product of 2 other Riemannian manifolds. And that list happened to include only groups that were transitive on the unit sphere. So every one of those groups, you would take any point on the sphere in the tangent space and bring it to any other point. So it was transitive. So that was kind of a question, well, why are they all transitive on the sphere? And I said, oh, I want to try that problem. And he said, don't do that. He said, that's a very hard problem. So Borel tried it. He couldn't figure it out. So that was just like throwing gasoline on the fire. I said, well, I'm going to do that problem. And by perhaps a miracle, I did. So that was a good thesis. I was very pleased. I had some interactions with Singer along the way because he was interested in that problem. And we talked about it a little bit, or wrote to each other. And so then they finished that, and they hired me, and I went to MIT and became a Moore instructor. But okay, so now I was an instructor at MIT, but I still had this sort of, urge to do something different. And when I had been in Colombia on my motor scooter trip, and we got to Bogota, and I saw Colombia and my friend, it was a very exciting country. You could do anything there, it seemed. There were all kinds of things that could be manufactured, one thing or another. And I had this friend down there who was very smart, in fact, 2 friends, and I said, you guys ought to start a business. And they said, well, I don't know. I said, I'm going to come down to Colombia, and I won't leave until we find a business. And not that I had any money particularly to invest in this business, so it turned out I did have a little bit. And I stayed there 2 weeks. We found a business. They said they were going to do it. The father of one of them put up half the money. I said, okay, I'll scrape, and my father and I put up a little bit of money. And then I went back to MIT after those 2 weeks. And of course, it took a little while for all that to take place. But I decided after that first year, this is so exciting. I'm going to move to Colombia and work in this factory, in this place. another nutty idea. And so I took a job in the interim because the place wasn't ready. In fact, wouldn't have been ready for another 2 years or a year and a half in an engineering place, some engineering company. So I quit the Moore instructorship, and my job was computers were just coming in. My job was to calculate Bessel functions on a computer. Now, I didn't know what a Bessel function was at that time, although I certainly learned what it was. And they made antennas, and they needed, anyway, it was the most tedious, horrible thing one could do was just calculate Bessel functions all day long. So I began to really miss academia. I was friends with Bott and with Singer and these guys, and so I said to Singer, I think I made a mistake. And he said, oh, well, we'll put you on Bott's contract. Bott was a great mathematician at Harvard. In those days, you had an NSF contract. They were very loose. You could just hire someone on the contract. So I went on Bott's contract. And then I went back and said, okay, I'll let those boys run the factory. I'll just be a minority investor, and I'll work on mathematics, which I did. I was working on, as David mentioned, minimal varieties. And minimal varieties are manifolds that have minimal area or volume, depending on the dimension, with respect to their boundary. So a soap bubble is a minimal variety in 2 dimensions, typically. Not a soap bubble, but if you take a wire frame and dip it in soap, you'll get a film. That's going to minimize area. And so I was just studying that subject kind of from first principles. Almost all the work had been analysis. But I was trying to understand the geometry of these things, and was working slowly and going along. And they hired me at Harvard to be assistant professor. So I was at Harvard for a full 2 years, once on Bott's contract and once an assistant professor. But I actually didn't like Harvard. I don't know, there was something. Any Harvard men or women here today? Probably. Yes, there was some. Well, maybe with you there, I'd have liked it better. But and I don't even know you. But I don't know, it was a stodgy place. And also they started the factory, so I felt I needed a change. So I went. There's a place in Princeton that's still going strong called the Institute for Defense Analyses, or it's a branch of the Institute for Defense Analyses. And there they would hire mathematicians, and it was super secret. It was a very highly classified place. They worked on secret codes and ciphers. In fact, in those days, you weren't even allowed to say what they worked on. So it was just stuff. But now it's permissible to say that's what they worked on. And it was. I didn't know anything about codes and ciphers.
So don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
This minor thing's going crazy. The refresh here. I'm watching this token because it's up 63%, which is nuts. But it's probably going to go to zero like everything else. We'll see.
Mathematics, and as much as half. And the other half, you had to work on their stuff. And that sounded pretty good. So we moved to Princeton. And, well, I loved that job. I loved everything about it. I learned about computers. I learned first that I would never know how to program a computer with any skill whatsoever. But there were, fortunately, people who could. I learned I liked to make algorithms and think about testing things out on a computer. Maybe you can crack this code with this algorithm. Most of the time it didn't work. Sometimes it did. It was kind of exciting. And I liked the people. And I was still working away at minimal varieties. And after maybe 2 years there, maybe into my 3rd year, I solved this.
That's dope, Anthony, that you run into your first bug.
The sort of famous problem in the subject.
I'm assuming your first bug. I don't know where you're at, but nice.
Of minimal varieties, which, and as David said, I showed that you could fill in smoothly. This is in codimension 1 in Euclidean space. So in Euclidean space, you have a boundary of 1 dimension lower, and you want 2 dimensions lower, like a curve in 3 space, whatever. And you want to fill in. And I proved that you could do that smoothly, without any singularities, through ambient dimension 7. So up to 6-dimensional surfaces and 7-dimensional space with a 5-dimensional boundary, I guess. It would work. You could do it, a uniform proof. But in 1 dimension more, my proof broke down, and I suggested a counterexample. Which turned out to, and I couldn't prove it was a counterexample. It was locally stable, but it might not have been globally stable. Now, so it's a beautiful thing. You take the 3-sphere and you cross it with itself. So now you get a 6-dimensional thing sitting in the 7-dimensional sphere in H space. Anyway, that's the boundary, 6-dimensional boundary. The cone on that, which obviously, since it's a cone, clearly has a vertex and a singularity, but that does minimize volume, 7-dimensional volume. And then, so that was a good result, and published this paper, which was everything I knew about minimal varieties was packed into this paper. But it was a good paper, and so that was very nice. And David said I won the Belbin Prize, and that's, I guess, what I won it for a few years later. And I was also doing good work for them. It was great, but it was the Vietnam War time. You remember, you all know about the Vietnam War, and some of you probably lived through it. And so now we didn't do any work that had anything to do with the Vietnam War, as far as I knew. Although, in fact, God knows what they did with what we did, because I never read any of the secret messages because we didn't have access to that stuff. We just tried to crack the codes. But I didn't like the war. Now, so the boss of my boss was in Washington, D.C. He was a general named Maxwell Taylor. Some of you probably remember old Maxwell Taylor. And he had been a general. Now he'd been kicked upstairs. He ran the Institute for Defense Analyses. And he wrote an article for the New York Times. It was a cover story in the magazine section of the Sunday paper, how we're doing so great in Vietnam. We're going to win the war. It's very important. Let's just hold still. It's a terrific enterprise. Well, I mean, I didn't think so. And I'm sure there were others who didn't think so. But I wrote a letter to the Times saying not everyone who works for General Taylor shares his views. In fact, I think the whole thing is stupid. And I mean, the words were classier than that, but that was the effect of the letter. And they published that letter eagerly, I'm sure, because, no one said anything. I didn't hear anything from my superiors. I heard plenty from my friends. But, okay. But then, a few months later, a young guy came, sought me out. He told me he was a reporter for Newsweek magazine. I think it still exists, but in those days, it was one of the two big news weeklies, that and Time magazine. He's doing a story in Newsweek magazine on people who work for the Defense Department who are opposed to the war. And he said, I don't have many takers, but I wonder if I could interview you. Now, I was 29 years old. No one had ever asked me for an interview before. And I thought, oh, sure, of course you can interview me. So he interviewed me. And, so the bottom line was, I said, well, the rule at IDA is you have to spend half your time at their stuff, and you can spend half your time on your own stuff. And my algorithm now is that I'm spending all my time on mathematics, and when the war is over, I'll spend an equal amount of all my time at their stuff, so I'll make it all up and say, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, exactly. Oh, because, and it wasn't even quite true, but it was close to being true. Anyway, then I did the only intelligent thing I had done that day. I told my boss that I gave this interview. It would have been more intelligent if I told him before I gave the interview, but I didn't. I told him afterwards. He says, you did? He said, well, what did you say? I said, well, I told him about my half and half proposition. And so he said, he says, I have to call Taylor, his boss. So he called Taylor. My memory is a little faint on this point, but I think he may have called him in my presence, or maybe I had to leave the room. But it seemed like only a microsecond before he told me, you're fired. And I said, my title is permanent member of the... As a permanent member of this outfit. He said, well, it used to be a temporary member. He said, I'll tell you the difference between a temporary member and a permanent member. He said, a temporary member has a contract. A permanent member doesn't. So I didn't have a leg to stand on. They may have given me a week's severance. I don't remember what the deal was. But they were probably more generous. And anyway, there I was. I didn't have a job. I had a wife, 3 kids, and no job. But I wasn't, I had proved this theorem. I knew I could get an academic job. And so I wasn't, terrified at the prospect. It was all kind of exhilarating, actually, being fired. I think it's good once. You shouldn't make a habit of it. You shouldn't make a habit of being fired, but once is perhaps salutary. Anyway, I did get, as David said, this offer at Stony Brook to be chair, and I thought that would really be fun. As I've said before, I thought it would be better to be the firer than the firee. And the department was not strong. They had a great physics department at that time. It was a very new university, and I had a wonderful time building a department. And I met Frank Yang, the famous physicist who was there, and we became friends. And we had an interesting interaction. So he would, after a few months, he invited me up to his office. He was going to tell me what he was doing. I didn't know any physics, but he was, Nobel Prize winning great man, and I figured I'd go up and get a lecture. And so I sat down, and he told me what he was doing. He covered the board with equations, and I didn't understand a goddamn thing. I didn't understand anything. I didn't know any physics, but I looked, tried to look as intelligent as possible. I thanked him very much at the end, and I went back downstairs. And we repeated the same thing in year 2, and then again in year 3. But something happened in the middle of the lecture of year 3. He kind of showed me these same equations. They were getting familiar. And then I realized, I said, stop right there. He said, why should I stop? He said, because you're trying to invent mathematics that was done 30 or 40 years ago. He said, what? What he was doing was, in gauge theory, you use bundles and they have connections. But I think he didn't know that you could also there was such a thing as parallel transport and a holonomy group and all that stuff. And he was tortuously trying to create parallel translation in a bundle with a connection. And I said, the mathematicians have done that. And he said, why would they have ever done that? Why would they study that kind of stuff? And I said, well, it was beautiful and natural, and it just came out. Anyway, how can I answer that question except to say it just came out of mathematics? So that was a great moment because he said, okay, so we had he organized a seminar of the members of this Institute for Theoretical Physics, and it was kind of a translation seminar. I said, we say this, you say that kind of thing. And he even wrote a glossary. He even wrote some kind of book with all these things. But it was the smartest group of students I ever had. It was his whole faculty, so it was, but it was great. And they gave me at the end a very thick dictionary, because I'm a terrible speller. They gave me one of these things that weighs 100 pounds, and as a gift for that. So in the meantime, I was doing geometry myself, and I started working with Chern, the guy. We had become he came in the second year, and when I was at Berkeley, having missed the first year, but we became friends. We didn't do any science together, but we became friends. And I had, while at Stony Brook, come up with some geometry in 3 dimensions that looked quite interesting. I showed it to him, and he said, "Oh, we can do this in all dimensions. This is very exciting," and so on. So we worked together and developed and wrote a paper, and that was the roots of these Chern-Simons invariants, which have seemed to be used in a lot of places. Which is, an example. I mean, here we did this math, and we didn't think, oh, it's going to apply to this, that, or the other thing. I thought maybe it'll apply, maybe other mathematics we built on it, as I suppose it was. But the idea that it would find its way into physics 10 years later and become quite ubiquitous. I mean, it's in condensed matter physics, it's in high energy physics, it's in cosmology, Chern-Simon's term. And I don't know what they're doing with it. I don't have the faintest idea. But mathematics is that way, and basic science is that way. You do a piece of basic science, and you don't know where it's going to go. But if it's pretty good science, it can lead to surprising places. I mean, when Maxwell developed the Maxwell equations, did television occur to him as a consequence? I don't think so. He just wanted to know how the hell how's this work, and obviously figured it out. So I was doing mathematics with Chern, and then with a guy named Jeff Cheeger. Grew out of that with something called differential characters, which now is kind of the root of a subject called differential cohomology, if you've ever heard of that. And we worked on that, and it led to questions that neither of us could figure out about rational numbers or certain volumes.
Check out my API folder. Currently, I think somebody is calling like the 2-3 gigabyte file, and I think the way we're setting things up now is that it's not parallel processed. So imagine we have 100 people all calling at once. Everybody's got them waited in line. Can you first confirm that is the current case? And here's the notes from the AI that was trying to call it. And
Bill, baby, Bill, organized night.
Yes, our slogan must be, learn, baby, learn, so that we can earn, baby, earn.
I looked at the server, and this is what I'm seeing now. So I don't know if we have parallel processing or not in there, but it's clearly that this got smoked.
Volumes, were they rational or irrational? We really wanted to figure it out, and we couldn't. We spent a couple of years struggling with those questions. I won't tell you where they came from. But in the meantime, my investment in Columbia paid off. So part of the company was sold. I had a few bucks. My father had more, but we had some money. And my Colombian friends, God knows why, said, okay, we have this money. We want you to invest it for us. Now, where they got the idea that I would be any better at investing for them than that broker at Merrill Lynch years ago, I don't know. But I said, fine, I'll do that. And I had a friend who had been a mathematician and was now a commodity trader. And he seemed to be doing pretty well. So I said, Charlie, we have this money. Would you manage it for us? And he said, yeah, of course. I'll be happy to. He said, why not? It was more than he'd ever seen. So he thought it was good. And so I made a deal with Charlie. He was going to get 25% of the profits. No fixed fee, but 25% of the profits. And I said, but if we lose much money, and I said, if we lose 25%, you have to stop. We don't want to lose all the money. So that's a stop loss, okay? But as I was walking out of his apartment, something occurred to me. And I said, oh, also, if you make too much, we're going to have to stop. And he said, well, how much is too much? It's a reasonable question. I said, 10 times what we invested after your rapacious fee. Well, how could he say no? I mean, 10 times as much. So he said, fine. So that was the other stopping rule. We stopped on that basis after 10 months. He had multiplied the money by a factor, I guess, of 13, and when you take off 20. Anyway, we actually made 10 times that money. It was incredible. It was just completely lucky. I know it was completely lucky. But there it was. So now I really, had some money, and I had followed his work. I had followed his work carefully. In fact, I had to, because he never quite knew where he was. So I said, okay, I'll keep the books. Every week, I'll tell you where you stand. He said, okay, that's great. It'll take my mind off that. So I did that. And so I learned a little bit about that, and that was soybeans in my youth. And I thought, okay, mathematics is driving me crazy. I had recently gotten divorced. I was on the wrong side of the first wife. I was involved with another woman who turned out to be my second wife and my present wife. And I was frustrated with work, so I thought, I'm going to go into business and be a trader. And I did. I did do that. And I started doing some trading, and that was working okay. I got some investors. I brought in a guy from IDA. He was the best cryptanalyst in the world. He was a wonderful model maker and so on. In fact, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Baum-Welch algorithm or the EM algorithm. Anyway, it's a famous algorithm in statistics. He was the Baum-Welch. So he was a very smart guy. And I said, I'm looking at these commodity charts. Actually, it was currencies that we were trading, and they seem to have some shape to them. They don't look random to me. So maybe we could make some models. And he said, okay. But it turned out, and we did. We made a model, and it looked like it was going to be okay, and to trade. But we were doing fundamental trading, and he hated the model building. He said, he loved the fundamental trading. He loved reading the newspapers and reading the tickers and the news tickers and getting ideas. And it turned out he was, for a while, very, very good. So we put the models aside for a while, and we traded, and we did very well. We did very well. But it was a gut-wrenching experience. One day you walk in and you think you're a genius. Oh, my positions are in my way. Look, and the next day you walk in and they're against you, and you feel you're a dope. How could I have done what I did, and so on. There was no rhyme or reason. It was just, you put your finger in the air and you try to sense which way the wind is blowing. I'll tell you one story to illustrate the craziness. So it was a time when gold was going up. Gold had been you couldn't buy or sell gold, and finally you could, and the price was rising, and it was rising. And we had a deal where Lenny Baum and I, where we'd each have our own account. I was the boss, but we each had our own account. And in our own account, in fact, we both bought gold. We were supposed to be independent. We both liked gold. The gold was going up. It started at $200 and $300 and $400, $500. It got to $500, which by today's standards would be like $1,500 or $1,800. And I said, this is a very high price. I'm getting out. And I sold my half. But Lenny, I think you should. No, you don't know how high this is going to go. You can't. This is going to go very, very high. I said, okay. So he stayed. It was $600. It was $700. It was $800. It got to $800. That day, I happened to be talking to a friend of mine on the phone who was a stockbroker. And in fact, he was my stockbroker. And I said, how are things, Dick? And he said, oh, well, they're fine. This morning, my wife, Lucy, came into my closet and cleaned out all of my old tie clasps and cufflinks and went downtown to sell them. They were gold. They were gold, see? I said, well, are you having a hard time in your family? Why is she? So your wife said, oh, he says, she's a jeweler. I said, yes, I know that. So he said, so she only has to stand in the short line. I said, what do you mean, the short line? He says, don't you know that people are lining up and standing for hours selling their gold? I said, no, I didn't know that. Thank you very much. We had a phone in those days. If you picked it up, it was a different phone. If you picked it up, you went right to the floor of the commodity exchange. And I got Lenny in the office, and I put the phone up to his ear, and I said, Lenny, sell the gold. In fact, and he said, no. I said, Lenny, I'm the boss. Sell the blankety blank gold. I was more emphatic than that. He said, all right. Oh, he sold the gold. Maybe it was $810. Oh, he was mad. And the next day, we came in, and it opened at $830. And he said, I told you. By the end of that day, it had dropped 25%. It was down to $600 all in one day, and it never, of course, went back up. So that is an example of common sense and very good luck. Good luck. If I hadn't called my stockbroker the day I did, Lenny would have held on to that gold. It went back to 200 after a while. We would have ridden it all the way down, I think. And so it was just plain luck that I had. But it was at least common sense that I thought, if everyone in the world is trying to sell their gold, how long can it be going up? There is such a thing as supply and demand. So there it was. So that was what it was like to be a fundamental trader. It was stomach wrenching. So Jim Axe, I got Jim Axe, who was a very well-known algebraist, to come and work for us. And he was interested in the models that Lenny eschewed, and he got a good computer programmer, and we built some models, and he showed that the models would use for currencies, would work for all commodities, and we were on our way with models. And, we kept fundamental trading, but more and more we were trading the models, and finally it took about 8 years. The models were good enough, and we went to all models. And then we started the company. This was a forerunner. We started the company called Renaissance Technologies, which has been going ever since. And it has 300 people. It has 90 PhDs, and it's 100%. It's 100% models, and it's been remarkably profitable for a long time. And other mathematicians came in to help. I don't know if Elwin Berlekamp is here. Maybe some of you know Elwin. Henry Laufer joined us, and they each made important contributions. So it has been remarkably successful. So people say, well, what's the secret? And well, there are a lot of little secrets, because the way this works, you have a lot of smart guys, and they keep inching away and getting a new idea here and a new idea there, and you pile them together, and soon you have an awful lot of little ideas that are independent of each other, and you can make some progress. But I think, so people say, what's the secret sauce? But the secret sauce was really, in the first instance, having very smart people working for the firm. We were academics ourselves. We had an idea of who was a good scientist and who wasn't, and we brought in and continued to bring in excellent people, not just mathematicians, but computer scientists, statisticians, experimental physicists, astronomers. We got 4 or 5 astronomers who are good. They look at data. They can't do experiments. You can't make this star bump into that star. You just have to take it as it is, and that's, and make models. So great scientists. We built a terrific infrastructure. The computer guys are wonderful. So we take in, I think it takes in 9 terabytes a day of data comes into that outfit. And it all gets stored and organized and dished up to the researchers and so on. So it's a great infrastructure. It's an open atmosphere. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And every week there's a research meeting. If you've had a good idea that you think it's going to go somewhere, you present it. If it looks good, it goes to a small meeting. People vet it more carefully. But there aren't little groups working in the dark. Oh, this is my little system, and I want you to use it. So, and that's the best way to do science, I think, in a collaborative manner. Sure, you don't immediately, the first time you have a thought, you don't run down the hallway saying, I have a thought. But, you test it out a little bit. But so I think that's a very good way to do things. Everybody has a piece of the profits. All the senior people own part of the business, and that, I think, is good, too. So we have very little turnover. And we trade everything worldwide. We trade everything. It runs 24 hours a day. Not 7 days a week, but I guess 5. And the only rule is we never override the computer. No one ever comes in any day and says, the computer wants to do this, that's crazy, we shouldn't do it. You don't do it. Because you can't simulate that. You can't study the past and wonder whether the boss was going to come in and change his mind about something. So you just stick with it, and it's worked. So, well, so obviously I made money. And in 1974, with my wife, Marilyn, we started a foundation, charitable. We've been giving money away. Marilyn thought, hey, we should have a foundation. So we had a foundation. And it was a one-woman foundation. It was in her dressing room, and she had a little box with the records and so on. She studied accounting. She was actually a PhD in econometrics, but she didn't know anything about accounting. And so she took a night course in accounting. And I put something on the door of her dressing room. There was a wonderful cartoon. It showed a medieval setting, a big castle with a tower, and someone was standing on the tower addressing the multitudes below. And one of the multitudes people said to his neighbor, and to think he started life as an accountant. So, so she studied accounting, and we built up the foundation. Initially, we gave money very broad.
What are your thoughts on turning this into an iOS app? Would it be doable? Because the main portion of this that makes it doable for me as a US person is I can build an app for you. You can download and take all responsibility. We don't run with you. We don't have your keys. We don't hold funds. We do nothing. It's just a trade with. And yeah, what is I guess what I'm getting at is, would we be able, on a mobile device, would they be able to just plug in their
baby, Bill.
API key like they do here, or sorry, secret key, and then
yes, our slogan must be learn, baby, learn, so that we can earn, baby, earn.
Broadly to social causes, to universities, to a variety of things. But in 2004, which is just 10 years ago, we decided to just focus on basic science, and other kinds of giving that we did were done outside of the foundation, and the foundation grew. And it's very good. It's a good foundation. We have a large project on the causes of autism to try to understand that. It's really a lot of genetics and neuroscience. We have less applied things in various aspects of life science. We have a math and physical science program, in fact, that David Eisenbud, who's sitting right there, helped organize for us. So we have various kinds of grants and programs and one thing or another. And we also started in the last few years goal-driven collaborative projects. So that's as it's stated, it's a collaborative project consisting of maybe 10, 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 scientists, typically in different places, but all working towards a common end. We have one on the origins of life, which is an underfunded thing. You can't imagine the NSF's going to, certainly not the NIH, is not going to give you any money for the origins of life, but it's really fascinating, and that's a project. We have a project called Many Electrons, which is sort of a material science, condensed matter physics, trying to model the clouds of electrons inside materials. It's a many-body problem, really, but you have, not only is it many bodies which are electrons that would normally repel each other, but you also have, they're entangled. If you guys know what entanglement means, it's a strange phenomenon in quantum mechanics. So modeling these big clouds of electrons is extremely difficult to do, even though the first principles are well known, but so what? And so that's a project, and that's going quite well, actually. We have a project in microbial oceanography, studying all the interactions between the myriad of microbes in the oceans, and a number of other things. So it's quite a vibrant foundation, and I think maybe some people here have been beneficiaries. Anyone gotten a grant from us? Yeah. Oh, you're all in the first row. Okay. okay. I didn't realize that. Okay, well, I mean, I knew some people here got grants. So we give all kinds. Oh, there's someone way back there. Why aren't you in the first row with these beautiful girls? So that's the foundation. Now, actually, under less than wonderful circumstances, I went back to my older age to do mathematics again. And in 2004, we lost a son. We lost one of our sons. And that was obviously very sad. And kind of as a refuge, I just started thinking about math. And, you know, doing mathematics, you can retreat into your head, and you're just thinking about a problem, and it can blot out other stuff. And I thought about a problem in what's now called differential cohomology that I had thought about before, and I got serious about it. And turned out, I later discovered there was a group of Germans. Any Germans in the audience? Well, anyway, okay, there are some Germans in the audience who were working on the same problem. I didn't know that at the time, but I got an idea of how to solve it. But it needed some topology, which was beyond me. And I spoke to my friend Dennis Sullivan, who probably you've heard of, who's a great topologist. And together we solved this problem. We beat out the Germans. They were very nice Germans, actually. They came over and they had some other results that we didn't have, and so on. And so it was all very collegial, but nonetheless we beat them. And so that was gratifying. And since then, I've written a couple of other papers with Dennis. So I'm back, small way, doing some mathematics. So I retired from Renaissance in 5 years ago, 2009, and I'm the chair, so I go to a monthly meeting. But those guys are doing a wonderful job. Peter Brown and Bob Mercer, who came out of IBM 20 years ago, and they ran the speech recognition group for IBM, and they came and then they kept bringing members of their group to Renaissance, and now they're running the company. So, and I've just been focusing on the foundation. In fact, one of our, I mentioned the other programs, the basic science program. We have a program called Math for America in New York City, which John Ewing, who was formerly the head of the executive director of the American Math Society, who was here, there he is, with his wife Janice, and John runs that program, and it's a very successful program of getting competent teachers and rewarding them in the New York City schools and now in the state schools as well. And so that's what I do. So I gave a similar talk some years ago, and my wife said, "Well, you ought to end the talk with your values." And I said, I think we were in the car. I said, "But I'm not sure I have any values." I don't know what my values are exactly. But I said, "Well, but I have some guiding principles. We'll call them guiding principles, which looking back, I think I probably followed. So I have 5 guiding principles. I'll happily tell you. So one of them is don't run with the pack. Try to do something that's original. Well, of course you want to do something original, but sometimes it's in math or in science in general, everyone's kind of running to solve the same problem, do the same thing. If you're really fast, maybe you're going to be the winner, but it's better. I think probably you're not going to be the winner, but if you can sort of do an end run around things, think about something that other people aren't thinking about, that's a pretty good way to do things. Now, I've partnered with a lot of people, and I think that partnering with people is terrific, but you want to partner with wonderful people. And the names I've mentioned, Chern and Sullivan and various people, John Ewing, they've been really outstanding people, David Eisenbud, outstanding people. And you can leverage your own efforts and sometimes get, partner up with people who are smarter than you, but that's fine. And but just have good choice in partners, and I think I've always tried to do that. A third principle is be guided by beauty. Now, you all are mathematicians, and mathematics is beautiful, and you know when an equation is great or idea is very pretty and so on, and that's a wonderful aesthetic to follow. But it's not just true in mathematics. There are aesthetics in other enterprises. A well-run business is kind of a beautiful thing. If everything is just working just right and the pieces are meshing and it's a good organization, that's kind of beautiful. And it's so beauty could be a good guide. The penultimate principle is don't give up. I mean, now sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, and you can just say the hell with it, but and go on to something else, and that's a decision that we've all made at one time or another. But persistence has a lot of value, and something that's really worthwhile can take a lot of time to come to fruition, and you ought to have patience if you believe in something to stick with it. And my final principle is hope for good luck. And that's it. So thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for questions, so the floor is open.
Okay, who has a question? All right, there's one there. And speak loudly.
So a lot of your stories with the forum, you did something kind of exciting that maybe didn't sound like the best idea at first, but you went ahead with it anyway and it turned out okay. So I would like to know if you have any wisdom to share about when not to do something. When do you hold
Well, I've not done a lot of things. So the question is, when do I have any wisdom about when not to do something? And, well, I don't think I have any wisdom on that anyone else. It looks like a room full of sensible people. And you probably can, you've had a lot of opportunities to say no. And in particular, being head of a foundation, you really need to know how to say no because, if you well, anyway, I was going to tell a joke, but I won't. Okay, another question. Yeah? I can't hear you.
Can you give us your thoughts on the hedge fund industry today? What do you think is working right? What do you think is not?
Okay, my thoughts on the hedge fund industry today. Do I think it's working right, or I think it's or what's right or what's wrong? Well, there are a lot of hedge funds today. When I started this, there were a lot fewer. A hedge fund, for those of you who don't know what they are, is a fund that people invest in. The managers charge a percentage of the profits, typically, let's say 20%, and a fixed fee, maybe 1 or 2%, and they manage the money, and you hopefully you benefit from it. Hedge funds have ebbed and flowed. I don't know what the word is. They've waxed and waned. They've got better and they've got worse. They go through periods where they seem to be doing all very well. The last 2 years, hedge funds have not done very well, but the markets have. One of the things that's good about some hedge funds buy and sell things, and they go long and they go short. You need a certain amount of volatility to make that work. If nothing's really moving, then it's hard to make money. There's a lot of competition in hedge funds. There's an awful lot of them today. So I think probably as a whole industry, it's not as successful as perhaps it was when there were fewer. But there are certainly some good hedge funds, and they come in all stripes. Our fund, as I've told you, was 100% systematic, and there aren't very many of those, but there are some, and a few of them are good. But there are many that have other policies and do fundamental trading, and there's a range of approaches. So that's all I can say about hedge funds, I think. Okay?
What's the reason that you chose to focus on these goal-oriented global collaborations?
What's the reason?
Why did you choose to focus
on these collaborative, goal-driven things? Well, it's not our only focus. It's shaping up to be about a third of what we'll do, of what we're doing, and it's not there yet. I find it challenging and enjoyable. It's our autism project, which is certainly goal-driven and is collaborative, has shown me, this is a pretty good way to make progress, and I like working with people, and I like seeing people working together. So you have to be careful. You understand that the goal may be far off, but if they're making progress, like this origins of life. I mean, I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to know the answer, which is really what's a completely plausible path, let's say, to RNA or something like that. From first principles, how do we get to that? On the other hand, I see them making some really nice progress, and how this chemical came to in existence of that. And they're also looking at exoplanets and seeing, and they can look at atmospheres of exoplanets and see what planets might have atmospheres that would be conducive to life. So a lot of science will get done, and gradually we'll eventually maybe we'll find the answer. So I like that approach. It's not the only approach. Most of the money we give out in mathematics is to individual researchers and so on, and all those people who held up their hands are individuals. But I like that. Yes? When you were a kid, how did your parents help you foster your mathematical knowledge? When I was a kid, how did my parents help foster my mathematical knowledge? That's the question, and the answer is they didn't.
It's something that truly exists.
They thought I was a good kid, and they were
all of us. It's
glad I liked school, but I don't think.
This is what I believe, and I'm willing to die for it.
Yeah.
Period.
They said, this boy is going to be a mathematician or anything like that. So I wasn't pushed in any direction whatsoever, except to do my homework. I was not a good homework doer. In fact, I hated doing my homework. Yes?
In your professional life, when you look back, would you change anything, like going earlier into business or doing more mathematics?
Okay, so would I change anything as I look back in my professional life? Well, not really. I don't think I made any huge mistakes in my professional life. One doesn't know what a different path might have led to, but there's nothing that glares and said, oh my God, I wish I hadn't done that. I mean, there's certainly things in my life that I can say I wish I hadn't said that or one thing or another, or gone out with that particular girl. But in general, no. When I look back, I think it was an okay path. There's no big change that I would want to make.
With the question of such smart people.
Wait a minute. Okay, you next, but speak up.
With the question of such smart people at Renaissance Technologies, and for all the years that you've been working there, I would think that, at one end, you guys try to make profit, and there's a lot of secrecy involved with the algorithms. But I would think that you probably came across a lot of potentially interesting knowledge or new science. Do you ever feel a need or desire to share whatever interesting?
Okay, that's a good question. The question is at Renaissance, where the algorithms that they develop and the ideas are very proprietary and not, you can't patent them or copyright them because people will just take it over and you just be in lawsuits all the time. And the question is, if we're developing this kind of new science, would we have any wish to sort of share it with the general public in some sense or other? And the answer is no. No, but that's not meant as a joke. There isn't anything that these guys have done that of such generality and power that it's a shame that the world doesn't know it. It's a very powerful group of people who can focus on data and get some very good results. But there's nothing but so general that it would really need to be shared with the world, as far as I know. Yes.
How do you think about math education in America? Can you tell us about where the MFA program came from and your thoughts on math education?
Yes. Yes. Okay. The question is, what are my thoughts on math education in America? And my thoughts are it needs to be better, as probably most of you realize. So kind of the background. I got interested in this because when I went to Berkeley to be a graduate student, I was the beneficiary of a National Defense Education Act fellowship. Now, only the old folks here have probably ever heard of the National Defense Education Act, but when Sputnik went up in 1957, the whole country went into spasm. And the Congress said, oh my God, the Russians are going to beat us. They'll be on the moon throwing Butker at us soon. We can't get our satellites up. They got theirs up. We need to strengthen the scientific enterprise in the United States. And they did. They created the National Defense Education Act. They beefed up the National Science Foundation. When I got because I quarrel with John about this, but I'm going to give the statistic anyway. When I got my PhD in 1961, I think there were fewer than 100 people in the United States, certainly 100 Americans, who got PhDs in mathematics. 10 years later, there were 1,400. Now, 100 was too few. 1,400, we didn't know what to do with them because there weren't enough academic jobs. But and in other professions, other scientific areas, this was similar. There was a lot of growth, and we saw a national problem, Cold War, and we were going to solve it through building up our science, and we did. We did a marvelous job of building up science. Salaries went up in universities for those kind of folks, and a lot of people came in to science, young people, and it was a great success. So about 15 years ago, I looked around, maybe more than 15 years, and I realized that the teaching math, I was only focusing on math, in our schools was really not very good. And I realized, like we all do, that the economy is becoming far more quantitative than it used to be 40 or 50 years ago, and more of things are based on quantitative methods, and we're not really keeping up. Our teachers, by and large, don't know, in particular in math, I think, the subject very well. Because if you know enough math to be a good high school teacher, and that means you know college math and something so that you're not just one step ahead of the kids, if you know that much math, and you have the least mental agility, which you'll see in a second, I don't have, you know how to program a computer, you can go to work for Google, you can go to work for Microsoft, you can go to work for Apple. I have an Apple fellow right here in front of me. And you're going to get paid twice as much, and so on. So what's to keep someone who actually knows the field in the profession? Well, you might really like teaching, and that's great. But the pull out, so something needed to be done to make the job of teaching math, and in fact math and science, more attractive, so that we would educate our kids better and be able to compete in the world. And so I said, okay, I have a program, I know what to do. A friend of mine, or a guy who became my friend, Senator Schumer, had just been elected, and part of the reason he was elected is because I gave him $250 or whatever it was. Anyway, I was a supporter of Senator Schumer. I probably was a little more, but it wasn't some huge amount. But I had a party for him and became a friend. And as soon as he got elected, I went right to Washington. I said, "Here's an idea. You got to do this." And I said, "Create this program, reward people who give teachers a test. If they pass the test, you give them money." And they'll be rewarded, and they'll stay in the schools, and people will be drawn into the field because they're going to get an extra stipend from the government, like the National Defense Education Act. He said, "That's a great idea. I'll get right on it." And as I left his office, another group went in about, something about dams on the beaches of Long Island, and I heard him say, "That's a great idea. I'll get right on it." I'm exaggerating slightly, but only slightly. So he didn't get right on it. We had a few conversations about it, but nothing was going to happen as a federal program. And so a few years went by, and then actually MSRI was kind of in the picture because we had a poker tournament to benefit MSRI. David hooked me up with a few people in New York who were also in the financial business. I don't know where you found those guys. And we sat together. How can we benefit MSRI? And one of the guys was a poker player, and we were talking. And I said, "Hey, I like poker." I said, "Why don't we have a charity poker tournament?" And we did. And it worked extremely well, and MSRI got the benefit. But I thought, well, if we're going to do this every year in New York, it better be something that really relates more to New York, because I'm not going to get these guys coming out every year to give money to MSRI, which is in California, and for math research. I don't know how we talked them into it the first time, but so then I thought, okay, maybe this is the time to start this program here in the city and just do it ourselves. And so we did, and we had the tournament every year, and that raised some money, and of course I provided a great deal of it on top of that, and so that the program was started privately. 2 years ago, the state of New York took on to do the same program outside the city as we're doing in the city, and they're building up. We have 800 teachers of now math and science in New York City. Next year it'll be 1,000, and that will be 10% of the math and science teachers in New York will be part of this core of really knowledgeable, committed teachers. They all get extra stipends and so on, and the state's doing the same thing. And we're hoping that other states in the country will take on. The federal government is in a state of paralysis, and it's probably better to work through states. But it's a long haul. That's a very long answer. I'm sorry. And maybe I'll take one more question. Okay.
As a former math student, math educator, what is your opinion of Bourbakism, which was certainly a powerful movement in mathematics in the 20th century?
You mean Bourbaki? Yeah, Bourbaki. Do you guys know about Bourbaki? Know about Bourbaki? Well, it was a sort of the French, of course, did this. Any French people in the audience? No. They wanted to codify, all of, in the United States and England, we have common law. The tradition, and the traditions grow up, and you go by various court cases, and that becomes a law and one thing or another. In France, and it's not like that at all. Everything is codified. The whole, Napoleon wrote this code, and the French like to codify everything. And so Bourbaki wanted to get right down to it and codify mathematics in some way or other. And I think some of it was pretty good. I'm not an expert on it. What do you think about Bourbaki?
Well, you mentioned the National Science Foundation. That was created in 1958, by the way, by Congress.
Oh, that's when it went. I see. It was actually created at that time. Well, okay.
At that time, they did many good things. You also had the School Mathematics Study Group. That was a group of 40 individuals. 20 of them were math professors from leading universities. The other 20 were headmasters from leading prep schools. And they appear to have been heavily influenced by Bourbaki. In fact, they wrote a booklet which contained the following statement, which I saw 50 years ago. They said, in the 1990s, every math student in elementary school will be exposed to topology.
Will he catch it? Will they catch it, or just be exposed to it?
Money is not always well spent.
There's no question, and I'm sure the federal money is not well spent, and my Republican friends think not a penny of it is well spent, but I think some of it is. Anyway, I think we have to stop. David is going to throw me off.
All right, that was a good little binge on Jim Simon's videos, and I think it was very informative, so I'm glad we watched that.